Hey YouTube, have you ever seen a ghost? Have you ever felt like you weren't alone, that something invisible was watching, waiting, lurking just out of sight, and trying to communicate with you through hot sauce packets? Because if so, same! So let's talk ghost stories. Really quick, before I get into the stories, the art I'm working on in the background is some new merch I designed for Campaign 3 of Critical Role. You can get this art as stickers and keychains on my online store, so check the link in the description if you're interested. Anyway, on to the spooky stories! Now, I do consider myself a skeptic where the supernatural type things are concerned, but listen, sometimes telling those stories are fun, and it's fun to freak people out with the spooky, scary stories. I love listening to them, and I love telling them, so get off my back and quit spoiling my fun. I grew up and spent most of my life in Texas, but for college, I moved out of state and went to a school in a little town called Savannah, Georgia. Yeah, I was a SCAD kid, what's up? Among other things, the town was famous for its historic charm, the small town vibes, and the fact that it was haunted as hell! Seriously, the entire town was built on old Civil War ground, and pretty much every building in the place was haunted with some sort of phantasm or ghost or whatever. We had not one, but multiple different ghost tour companies, and I've seen several ghost story investigation type shows that took place in and around the town. Every single student at that school had at least one spooky ghost encounter during their time there, and my friends and I were not exempt. Now, SCAD's campus was a little bit unique in that we didn't really have a campus per se. All of the school's buildings were old buildings that had already existed in the city, and the school just bought them, gutted them, and made them into art buildings for the students. So our campus was a whole bunch of buildings scattered throughout the entire city, and we had to take a bus between each one. Some of them were pretty normal, but all of them were old, all of them were weird and eclectic in some way, and so many of them were infested with ghosts. I heard my first Savannah ghost story during orientation when we first arrived at school. There was an old rundown building on one of the main thoroughfares through town called 12 West Oglethorpe. The building had been condemned for years and was super old and run down. According to our orientation leaders, the year before it had somehow set itself on fire, despite the fact that the electricity had been disconnected for years and there were no signs of attempted arson, just spontaneous building fire. Apparently it got broken into by a lot of homeless people and rowdy college students, and there were so many reported ghost sightings from these people. I remember one of the first times we walked past it, for some reason the usual plywood blocking the door wasn't there, and the door was just hanging open so we could actually see the inside. It wasn't anything special, just an old, empty, rundown building, but it had such creepy vibes that no one wanted to even walk up the stairs. A few years later, my friends and I drove past it one night and saw a cloud of smoke that was suspiciously human-shaped, and it was freaky as hell. Ghosts confirmed! Ghosts at 12 West Oglethorpe, it's haunted, confirmed. The bummer part is that after we graduated, they renovated the place and now it's like a restaurant or something. It's got a whole website and it looks really nice, but dang it, I miss my old haunted building. We used to be able to see it from the balcony of my dorm. It was so spooky. It was like an old friend. A very haunted, kind of cursed friend. But we also had some friends who lived in a basement apartment downtown who told us stories about how the apartments on the floor above them were empty, but they always heard the sounds of furniture being moved around almost every night. Spooky! The school dorms were haunted as well, of course. In the dorm I lived in freshman year, my roommate and I lived on the bottom floor, and there was a second floor above us. Sometimes, late at night, she and I would hear the sound of someone walking wearing tall stiletto heels walking down the hallway. But when we ran upstairs to check, there was nobody there. Ghosts confirmed! The dorm we lived in sophomore year also had some ghosts associated with it, but I never had an encounter with these. There was some story about the dorms being an old hotel, the hotel being run by this slimy old guy, and a woman who used to live at the hotel with her son, and they paid for the hotel by doing favors for the owner. And when the mom was doing favors for the skeezy hotel owner, she would make her son go out on the roof and play with marbles. But then one day he got locked out on the roof, and I guess he died. And then some days you could still hear the sound of the marbles on the roof. Ooh, spooky! And some nights you would wake up and smell the scent of a certain herbal substance wafting into your room through the crack under the door, and... Oh, wait, that wasn't a ghost, that was our terrible neighbors. Never mind. There were tons of ghost stories like these that circulated through the school, and for a while we mostly laughed them off. But in sophomore year, my friends and I actually did acquire our own ghost, and he was a weird one. This technically isn't my story, since this ghost never bothered me or my roommate, but I was told every little detail as it happened, so I get to tell the story in the video. In sophomore year, me and a group of my friends were all living in this one dorm hall, and all of our rooms were in the same hallway. It was me and my roommate, our terrible herb-obsessed neighbors next to us, and then 2 rooms with our friends on the other side of the terrible neighbors. And the other 2 rooms were haunted by a ghost that we named Dr. Milk Thunder. And I know what you're thinking, where the hell did that name come from? Well, the first evidence of Dr. Milk Thunder was our friend's beverages going missing. One friend drank a Dr. Pepper knockoff called Dr. Thunder and kept cans of it in their mini fridge. And apparently their cans of it would disappear faster than they would actually drink them. The other duo had a similar problem with the quarts of milk they kept in the fridge being emptied faster than they were actually using the milk. I remember them telling me that they were actually legitimately scared one of them had started sleepwalking because their milk kept disappearing in the night. Like, they did the thing where you put a piece of paper in the door, and if you open the door, the paper falls out, as well as using a Sharpie and marking the milk levels after each of them used the milk. But despite everything they tried, they would wake up in the mornings, the piece of paper would still be in the door, and they would have less milk than they did the night before. So between these 2 beverages getting spirited away in the night, they were combined to form the legend of Dr. Milk Thunder. We eventually started jokingly blaming anything that went missing on our resident phantom. Pencils went missing? Darn you, Dr. Milk Thunder! Snacks depleting faster than you thought they should? Curse you, Dr. Milk Thunder! Over time, it just sort of settled into our lives as a silly thing that we would joke about. But one night, the story would reach its climax. I remember it very vividly. My roommate Sarah and I were chilling at night in our dorm. Our dorm building was a renovated old hotel, and the walls where the door was less of a wall and more of a single giant window looking out onto the outer hallway. It was a little after midnight on the weekend, and the 2 of us were getting ready to turn in for the night, when suddenly 4 panicked silhouettes appeared in our window wall, banging on the glass and demanding to be let in. We opened the door, and our 4 friends spilled into our dorm, flustered and talking all at once, trying to tell us what had happened. Apparently, the 4 of them had gone to Taco Bell along with a 5th friend who lived in another dorm. They had all gone through the drive-thru, then stopped to eat their food at the 5th friend's dorm. The 5th friend lived in an apartment-style dorm called the Terrace, which was a set of small house-like apartments. Each house had 4 apartments inside it, 2 on the bottom floor and 2 on the top, with a shared common stairwell at the entryway. And our friend lived in one of the top floor apartments. So they had gone to Taco Bell, gotten their food, went inside the friend's apartment, and then realized that they forgot to ask for hot sauce and the employee at the drive-thru hadn't given them any. They decided that going back to Taco Bell wasn't too far of a drive, and they could just go back and request some hot sauce packets for their food. Now, in these apartment buildings, in the little landing space between the 2 doors to the 2 top floor apartments, there is a little window facing the courtyard. And that window had a little windowsill that was a few inches wide. According to my friends, when they entered the apartment, this windowsill was empty. But when they left their friend's apartment and walked out onto the landing, there were 2 perfectly placed Taco Bell sauce packets just sitting there. They swear up and down that they had not been there when they walked in, and no one had put the sauce packets there. So that's scary enough on its own, but it gets worse. You know how Taco Bell sauce packets always have the little sayings and quotes on them? Well, these two sauce packets apparently said, "I knew you'd come back for me," and "Can my friends tag along next time?" And my friends flipped their shit and zoomed all the way back to our dorm to tell us what had happened. So yeah, not only did we have a ghost, we apparently had a ghost that communicated through hot sauce packets. College was certainly a time. Now, I do have one final haunting story, but it happened a few years after I graduated, so it doesn't quite fit in with the college-era ghost stories that I've told so far. But it's not really long enough to make it its own video, so I'm plopping it here at the end. Also, the previous stories were all pretty lighthearted and silly, but this one was genuinely scary for a while. So of course I'm saving the best for last, you know? When I was in my mid-20s, I got a job working as a high school English teacher in Japan, and I lived there doing that job for a few years. I loved my job and I had a great time with it, but the shock of moving to another country did take a toll on my subconscious in multiple ways. One of the most difficult to deal with was the onset of sleep paralysis and subsequent night terrors. If you aren't familiar, sleepfoundation.org describes sleep paralysis as a condition identified by a brief loss of muscle control, known as atonia, that happens just after falling asleep or waking up. In addition to atonia, people often have hallucinations during episodes of sleep paralysis. And guess who got some pretty gnarly sleep paralysis ghost hallucinations? And I hear you saying, "Star, this isn't a ghost story. Sleep paralysis is a sleep disorder, you dummy." Trust me, I know, but it felt like a haunting, and I think after I give you some more details, you'll agree with me. I had never struggled with anything like this in the past, and only started getting them when I moved to Japan, so that was a fun and horrifying thing to deal with while living on my own in a country where I'd just moved. So the way these phantasmal hallucinations manifested was, I would wake up in the middle of the night, but I wouldn't be fully awake. I could look around my room, but my body was frozen, and I couldn't move no matter how much I tried. It was like I was stuck in place. The room was dark, but standing by the door, I could see a humanoid shape. It just looked like a dark silhouette of a man standing in my doorway and watching me sleep. The first few times it happened, he would just stand there staring at me. But later on, he'd sometimes start moving slowly towards me, looming over the foot of my bed, watching me, waiting. And it was creepy as hell. I even started seeing it out of the corner of my eye while I was fully awake. I'd be standing in the kitchen making dinner and just see a shadow out of the corner of my eye in the hallway to my bedroom, but I'd turn around and there'd be nothing there. To make matters worse, at its peak when the nightmares started getting especially bad, things started happening in my apartment. Our building was old and mostly empty, so I didn't have any neighbors in the apartment next to, above, or below me, but I still heard creaks and groans like someone walking in the apartments around me. Hell, I even heard it inside my apartment sometimes. The buildings would creak and groan loudly at night, and I'd feel weird drafts coming from nowhere. And the scariest bit was when the sink in my kitchen started randomly turning on by itself. I'd be sitting on the couch in the living room, nowhere close to the sink, and suddenly I'd just hear the sound of running water. Look up, and the sink was just somehow turned on. After a few weeks of this, I guess my subconscious decided it had had enough. I was laying in bed and opened my eyes to find myself unable to move, with the dark shadow looming over my bed. This was the closest it had ever gotten to me, and in my head I started thinking, this is it. It's gonna get me. I didn't know what that meant, and I really didn't want to find out. And as I watched this shadow slowly descend onto the bed where I lay paralyzed, I felt myself breathe in, and suddenly heard, Fuck off! And my eyes shot open, and I was awake. Awake for real this time. I could move again, and as I sat up straight in bed, the shadow looming over me disappeared. The room was pitch dark around me, but the shadow was gone, and I was alone. It took me a few seconds, but I realized what had happened. I had apparently screamed "fuck off" at this ghost hallucination thing in my half-asleep state, and the sound of my own voice was so loud and jarring it woke me up for real. It was a funny thing in the moment, but after that, I never had sleep paralysis again. So what I learned here was, if you're being haunted, just tell the ghosts to fuck off, and maybe they'll leave you alone and take your sleep disorder with them. It's proven to work! Just trust me. I'm saying words on the internet, that's how you know I'm an expert. Anyway, that's all the ghost stories I have for today. I feel like I might have more that I just can't remember, so who knows, maybe I'll make a part 2 to this video, but to be fair, I'm not sure if anything is ever going to top Dr. Milk Thunder or yelling "fuck off" at a ghost and then it leaves you alone forever, so we'll see. Anyways, like I said at the top, if you like the art that I featured in this video, you can grab physical versions of it in my online store, so check out the link in the description below. And I will see you guys next time. Fare thee well, friends. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.